What is up, guys? It is time for a little MLB DFS strategy show where we will go game by game and talk about today's six-gamer and all the finer points therein for today's MLB main slate. And I am Chris Spags, joined once again by the man who's usually with me on these Monday morning journeys through the Major League Baseball world. He's nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Hey, I mean, we've already got people talking about in chat. People disappointed there's no NBA strategy show, which the reason there's no NBA strategy show is because there is no NBA. But at least as a positive consequence, there are much bigger MLB contests than we've had in recent days. And I think that's going to be the case going forward also into the summer, especially being the person who looks at some of our data and looking at some of the numbers that we've done on days where there's been no NBA. There's been a big spike in YouTube viewership. There's been a big spike in article content. So I think that the prize pools for baseball contests are about to get a lot bigger.
And it also means, honestly, probably a lot of people out there who, like you guys, if you've been watching this show on the regular or some of the other pieces of content on the channel, whether it be the MLB Deeper Dive or the Live Before Lock shows that are coming back in full steam, including today, definitely you'll have an advantage on some of these guys who are coming in and hopefully, not as wise to the world of MLB DFS. But we will talk about some of the strategy as we go, as always. And if you have any questions, drop them in the premium Slack or the YouTube chat. But first of all, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We do have that content going on all day long, whether it be MLB in season, NBA. Obviously, we'll still have shows going for that as well. PGA, MMA, NASCAR, it's all going on here on the channel. So make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Check out all the content. And also make sure to go play over at PrizePicks, who's simplifying the world of DFS for everybody out there who's tired of the sharks, the lineup optimizers, and the mass multi-entry. So that stuff can add up for you guys. So simplify your game by playing over at PrizePicks, where all you have to do is pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players available on the board to go over under their projected score. If you correctly select the 5-player lineup, you can get up to 10x your entry fee. They have the NFL, they have the NBA, they have esports, and they have MLB. PrizePicks has them all. And you can also make cross-sport bets as well. So you can pair up all the sports you want, kind of like a cross-sport parlay. So download the mobile app in the App Store or on Google Play today and make your first deposit. Get an instant deposit match of up to $100 when you use the promo code Awesemo. Simplify daily fantasy with PrizePicks today. And some of the ones on there today, honestly, it's a really ugly pitching slate. So some of the strikeout props might be a little tough, but I wouldn't hate taking a stab at Tyler Mahle over 6 strikeouts. I feel like that's one we can certainly get to or consider. But Greg, any of these jump out to you? I feel like not the best arms here. Your boy, Yu Darvish on this slate, but going against the Dodgers, that's not the best situation. Is there any that jumps out to you as a prop on PrizePicks?
Well, just because the prop is so low on Yu Darvish, I mean, only 6.0 strikeouts is the over-under for him. So yeah, it is a really tough matchup, but I think still the number for Yu Darvish should probably be closer to 7 range or something like that. Let me look at Yu Darvish's game logs really quick, because there haven't been very many games this year that he hasn't had at least 6 strikeouts. Okay, I take that back. He's been at 5 in a few of his last starts. I still lean towards the Yu Darvish over 6, but Tyler Mahle, actually, I remember the last PrizePicks show we were doing together. Tyler Mahle was starting. We both liked the over on his strikeouts, 6 again today against Minnesota. So that's not bad. Frankie Montas, he's pitched better recently. He's going to be a chalk play today in DFS. His over under 6 strikeouts, that's probably about fair, but I don't mind the over there. But yeah, those are the ones that at least at first glance look most appealing to me.
Is to play over there, and again, use that promo code Awesemo to get your $100 deposit match over at PrizePicks. That's the best one you're going to find in the industry right now for just one that's not a straight sports book. So make sure to go check out PrizePicks and use that promo code Awesemo. Let's get into our first game, though. We got Houston getting 5.5 implied runs in a spot here where they're going to be very chalky, though. There is some rain risk in this game, so we'll talk about that throughout the course of the day. The situation, Greg, though, the best park switch or park upgrade I feel like you're going to find on the slate, and really in a lot of situations going into Baltimore, game also where it's going to be 80-degree weather, 83% humidity, and Houston, a stack going to be very highly owned today, 26% aggregate ownership. Some of these guys here over that number, some of these guys a little bit under, but basically everybody besides Miles Straw going to be around that range on DraftKings today. And they're going against Keegan Aiken, who has been one of those guys giving up a lot of production on the year, 280 batting average, 1.5 whip, walking guys at an 8% rate, all these marks around the bottom of the slate today. And he's also given up an 18.6-degree launch angle, which is going to be really dangerous with the humidity and the weather working against him today, Greg. So first of all, I think we should probably eliminate Keegan Aiken from the player pool would be my first suggestion here, even though he is cheap and throwing about 70 pitches per appearance, just not a guy who's getting the strikeout results at a 21% rate this year. But B, Houston, very chalky, but I don't know how you don't get here for some portion of your lineups. There are some value prices, guys like Chas McCormick, Michael Brantley, you can also go to. That's a lefty-lefty matchup, and usually not the best in those. Houston, just one of those teams on a 6-game slate. I don't think you can avoid. I guess the question is, Greg, can you get creative enough to stack them in a way where you're not going to be just holding hands with the field?
Yeah. So first things first, I want to address the weather because you brought that up. There's a slight chance of rain, but right now it's nothing that looks all that concerning. And also we do have wind blowing out to right center field. That's going to be favorable, but it looks like a 20 to 30% chance of rain through most of the game. But then even if there is a slight delay, there's only a 15% chance of rain later on in the night. So to me, I don't really have too much issues with the weather here, at least nothing that's going to change my exposure at any point at this time of the day. As for Houston, by far the team with the best odds being the top stack of the day. Like you said, Keegan Aiken has not been particularly good this year. Also very favorable hitting environment. The only question here is ownership, because while we do have the Houston Astros with a 22% chance of being the top stack on the slate, which is about double what any other team has, we also have them projected for a 26% ownership share. So I look at those numbers. Houston, probably a team that I'm going to get to a whole bunch, especially as one-offs. But as a 5-man stack, I'm probably going to be a little bit underweight to the field.
Yeah, it would seem like mini stacks to me, always a move that I'm willing to consider when you do have a lot of ownership going to a team like this one. It's worth pointing out, too, we got a lot of guys who seem like they're new to baseball or newer to playing MLB DFS at any sort of volume. And first thing I would advocate for is not putting a ton of your money into this one, especially if you are new to MLB DFS. Like max out, the quarter, max out the dollar, max out the $4, whatever is relative to your bankroll. But I don't know, Greg, if you have any overall thoughts you want to give to these people. I mentioned in the chat, for DraftKings, you are trying to launch a lot of 5-man stacks into the mix, to ideally 5-3s, but you can go to 5-2s or 5-mans with the one-offs. But that 5-man stack's going to be the core play that you're going to. On FanDuel, you're going to the 4-man because that's the max on there. But I guess, Greg, do you have any overall thoughts you'd give to people who are playing for the first time, just how to approach this so they're not just getting hammered right away? Because if you're playing for the first time and going against people who have played MLB DFS, there is definitely a skill gap to keep in mind.
Yeah, so with this actually applies to all DFS, not just MLB DFS. If you're new to it or maybe you're not particularly profitable, you should always be playing at the lowest stakes possible and build yourself up. Like there's no reason to be playing in, say, like the $40 or $20 GPPs, whatever the main GPPs are for the day, until you're maxing out even like the 10-cent entry, the 25-cent entry, just because those are much softer games really across the industry, and if you are somebody who wants to play 150 max, FanDuel has, let's see, what does FanDuel have in the lobby? They always have the 150 max with like really, really low buy-in entries. There's the 5-cent tournament. There's the 25-cent tournament that 150 max on FanDuel. So you could even play 150 max on FanDuel with a very, very low buy-in. Like there's a lot of people that always say, hey, I can't play. If I was able to play 150 lineups, I would always win. But I don't have the bankroll for it. Well, you do, because it's 5 cents for an entry on FanDuel to 150 max. And I'm pretty sure that overlays a lot of the time. So like you could literally max enter tournaments for $30, $10, and you should always start at the lowest stakes possible. And then until you max that out, or if you're profitable enough that you're no longer allowed to play at those stakes, then you start to move up. But that's really where you should always start anyways, just in the softest fields possible, and play as much money as you can in the softest fields possible.
Yep, that's something Awesemo's talked about a lot too. There are some of the game plan series that you can find at the top tab at Awesemo.com, just talking about how to choose your tournaments, the game selection theory, and all that stuff. And as Greg talked about, maxing out a lower dollar tournament is going to be much more valuable if you're a newer player, or even somebody who's been playing for a while, than putting 1 or 2 entries in the big tournament. And I know some of us have had success, myself included, doing that for NBA. But like I know NBA pretty well, and I know where I want to attack for that stuff. And I think for MLB, it's different, where you're certainly trying to capture as many different contingencies, different opportunities, different stacks, different combinations of the stacks they're in. So that's something to keep in mind for MLB, and just play it smart. And HC0023 saying, I love the honesty here, which we appreciate. Travis Wade, a very bitter guy in chat too, just apparently trolling around here. But on this channel, at least especially when it's Greg and I doing shows, we keep it as real as possible here. Like I would love to see people succeeding relative to whatever that means. It'd be great if everybody could win 100K every night. But at the end of the day, like I'd rather see you guys who are new to this like crush the quarter, or have the best shot you can to have the quarter or the dime or all that stuff. And that's a big part of MLB, is just really knowing how hard it can be and knowing how sharp the field's going to be. So keep that in mind. Houston bats though, specifically, Greg, is there anybody who jumps out to you as being a must-have? Because I feel like Jordan Alvarez being a lefty-lefty matchup, he's 5K. Normally that's something that would differentiate you, but the ownership's still going to be there pretty heavy. Jose Altuve going to be the heaviest chalk overall on DraftKings with the price tag that's pretty high. I guess Chas McCormick is maybe the one that I would view as, I wouldn't say necessity, but a value play that does seem worthwhile. And so, in terms of just keeping the stack price down, but he's also going to be really owned. So I guess the question just, Greg, is there anybody who jumps out to you as being like, I need to get this guy if he's in the lineup?
I mean, the only guy who's going under-owned, in my opinion, is Miles Straw, who's currently projected for 6.6% ownership. Every other player that's projected to start for the Houston Astros, even Abraham Toro, who's been starting as late and is expected to start today because Alex Bregman is on the injured list, he's projected for 26% ownership. So Miles Straw is only projected for, like I said, 6.6%. Every single other player projected to start is 20+% projected ownership from the Houston Astros. And that's where, to me, the 5-man stack becomes a little bit problematic. Like I said before, it's not something I'm not willing to get to, but I'm certainly going to be underweight to the field just because I think that the ownership here is just way an overestimation of the likely odds of the Houston Astros being the top scoring team of the day. We have them with a 22% chance being the top scoring stack. That is by far the highest odds on the slate, but it's still not really that close to their ownership percentage. That's why we have them with the most negatively leveraged stack on the slate. So if you're playing one lineup, single entry, I think the best way to differentiate is stack a team that isn't the Houston Astros. For me, as somebody who plays 150 lineups, I'm going to have the Houston Astros in my player pool. And I think I'm going to be underweight to each individual player, with Miles Straw being the exception, just because he has such low individual ownership.
Jake Odorizzi going on the other side, a guy who's had his own struggles this year, though. The strikeout rate's starting to get back to normal. And honestly, he's starting to look more like the guy he's been historically. He's still struggling a little more with home runs, and you'd like to see a 4.8% home run rate this year, 5.5% if we roll that sample size going back to last year. But now up to a 24.8% carry. It's not that far off the 26.2% he's had historically. Batting average of 227, not that far off the 235 he's had historically. And a 1.18 whip, slightly better than the 1.22 whip he's had historically as well. So Greg, I feel like Odorizzi in this slate, maybe a guy who's in play. The weather is certainly going to help out Baltimore a little bit, but Odorizzi getting enough strikeouts facing a Baltimore team that on the year does strike out at a 25% clip, though I would have their projected lineup a little bit lower than that today. I feel like Odorizzi on a short slate, I'm willing to get there. I know you haven't historically been the biggest fan of his, but I think he's rounding into form enough that I can justify it. So give me your thoughts on what Jake Odorizzi's doing.
Well, listen, at least he's gotten unlucky. If I had to point to his underlying stats compared to his ERA, we'd have to say, look, he has a 5.68 ERA, but a 3.86 expected ERA. He has a 4.63 FIP. So there are reasons to think that he should improve going forward, but I don't know. He's really popular on this slate too. Right now at 5,900 on DraftKings, we have him projected for 20% ownership, or not 18.7 exactly. So that to me is a little bit higher than what he should be going at. If he was a really contrarian play, he would make more sense to me. At this kind of ownership, I'm currently not getting to him all that much. If you absolutely need a punt with a pitcher, I don't think that he's the worst option in the world, but I would actually prefer the Baltimore side to rostering Odorizzi.
Talk to me about the Baltimore side, because we're going to see some ownership going to Freddie Galvis. It looks like Anthony Santander, Austin Hayes, the rest of these guys going to be single-digit ownership on DraftKings at the very least. And I'm with you. Like, I think the hitting conditions, certainly you can take advantage of Odorizzi based on, again, he's giving up that 5% home run rate on the year. And that includes pitching a good amount of his games at Houston, where the ball should be kept, mostly in pocket while in that park. But Odorizzi, I think he's volatile. Like, I think he's a guy that I can play, but I'm with you that the Baltimore bats are going to be worthwhile if you're playing them. Top stack tool does have them a little bit overowned, but they have a decent chance of being a top value stack on the day with 12% chance of being a top stack. So how are you approaching Baltimore, and which guys stand out the most?
Yeah. So another thing also about Odorizzi's upside, he is not top 20 DraftKings points in any start the entire season. And he's also been pretty limited in pitch count. He's not worked 6 innings yet in any game. So that's something else that's a little bit of concern, although he's cheap enough that it might not matter. And the pitching options are pretty poor today. But from the Baltimore side of the game, the first thing I'll point out is that you'd mentioned Freddie Galvis is pretty popular. He's somebody who I think that if you're making Baltimore stacks, and right now they do look a little bit overowned, but part of that is because Freddie Galvis is projected for 13% ownership. We have Austin Hayes projected for 14% ownership. Past those guys, there's a lot of guys like Cedric Mullins is actually second in all of baseball and wins above replacement behind Vladimir Guerrero Jr. So he's actually been absurdly good this year. And even though it looks like at first glance he's priced really expensive on FanDuel and DraftKings, as good as he's played, you can make a case that he should actually be priced higher than what he currently is. That and Cedric Mullins, he's had some monster games. You look at his last 3 games, he's hit 4 home runs in those last 3. So games of 28 and 37 DraftKings points. So Cedric Mullins, I actually think that he's probably a little bit underowned and underpriced on this slate because I'm buying into him a little bit. Other guys in here, Trey Mancini, he's looked really good coming back from it was a pretty bad year for him last year, missed the entire season with cancer. Hasn't mattered. He's come back. He's looked really good this year. He's been a top end hitter again. So there are a bunch of good guys here. Mullins and Mancini being the ones that stand out the most. That I do think this is a favorable matchup against Shake Odorizzi, and I think that they're just going a little bit underowned. So I don't think that the stack is quite as overowned as the top stacks tool suggests, because the guys that actually are picking up the ownership aren't my favorite hitters on the Orioles.
I mean, also just to point out what Greg and I were talking about earlier of just, being smart about your, just how you're approaching DFS and all of that, and, managing your bankroll. You guys might see in chat a guy who's had multiple handles coming through, just being incredibly surly about everything. And that's the kind of bitterness you can accrue when you're not that smart at what you're approaching, and also not approaching it in a way that's good for your bankroll. So that's the kind of thing just to keep in mind here, where like we see guys like that all the time. That guy's always in chat being kind of surly. So, and apparently has two handles to do it, which is a problem of his own. But I would just point to, just try to keep your attitude positive, because otherwise you end up like that guy. And then you're just being toxic online, ruining everybody's day, as well as being a gigantic loser and failure at life. So just keep that in mind for everybody out there. We don't want to see that for you guys. We want you guys to do well and have great lives. So that is the main thing here. Don't be like Travis Wade, who we can all admit nobody in the world will ever like or love. Next game up.
He's a big fan of yours, though. He knows all of your career moves. He knows everything that happened. Which,
well, he doesn't know. He knows the inaccurate version of it. He knows the taking a shot at me version of things. But it's like, dude, just be better at life. Just find your happiness somewhere else. It's not going to be at this stream with me at 8:15 in the morning on the West Coast. So just go somewhere. Find your joy in life, and hopefully that would be maxing out the quarter and being smart in your DFS approach. Oakland, though, next game up, 4.4 implied runs going against Kyle Gibson. Kyle Gibson, probably the king of run prevention relative to what we look at for these stats. 205 batting average, 4 xFIP, 1.03 whip on the year. He's also got a 4% barrel ball rate, 8-degree launch angle. So keeping that ball down. And Kyle Gibson, to me, just one of those guys at his price tag. And this might just show how I'm approaching the slate or how I'm viewing it. I do think that I'm willing to take stabs at these guys at this price range. And Kyle Gibson, I think a better version of Odorizzi, as Greg mentioned, Odorizzi not throwing a ton of pitches, only 67 pitches per appearance so far this year. He's also been really inefficient with 4.5 pitches per batter faced. But Kyle Gibson is the exact opposite. 90 pitches per appearance, 3.8 pitches per batter faced. Keeps that ball down. Doesn't get strikeouts either, a 20% strikeout rate. But I feel like if you're going to go to a pitcher who's going to be cheap and also going to be more risk averse than me going Odorizzi, I think Kyle Gibson, I get the 20% ownership going his way. I guess the question I would have for you, Greg, is do you view him as having enough upside, or do you find the value being useful enough, given that he does look a little bit overowned compared to his chance to be a top pitcher on the slate? But in terms of being a top value, 26% chance to be a top value compared to that 20% ownership.
Yeah, I actually like both sides of this game a lot. We do have the Oakland A's as the most under-owned stack on the entire slate. There's almost no ownership going there. And, it makes sense because Kyle Gibson has been really good this year. So Kyle Gibson, I do view as the best value pitcher on the slate. He's pitched really well this year. Confusingly well, actually, because he's terrible the last couple of seasons. But this year, 2.09 ERA, 3.11 expected ERA. The upside is a little bit of a concern, only a 19.9% strikeout rate. But he's pitched effectively enough, and the other pitching options in his price range are so poor that I almost think that the high floor is more valuable than the high ceiling in this price range, just because I think he's a far superior option than the other guys. And I don't have confidence that any of the guys in this price range other than him aren't going to get, totally blown up. So Kyle Gibson, I think just by necessity becomes an SP2 on DraftKings. FanDuel, he's a little bit less of a priority play. It's just easier to spend up for pitching, get to the guys like Yu Darvish or Julio Urias. But Gibson on DraftKings is definitely a preferred SP2 option.
It's worth pointing out the roof going to be closed as well, so that should help him out going against an Oakland team that, does get their shots to, get the ball up. And that's something we've talked about sometimes with our guy Max on the Deeper Dive shows, where guys who can get that looping swing going, who have a high launch angle, can sometimes get to these pitchers that have a low launch angle, because obviously, if they're swinging up enough, they can sort of overcome a guy attacking lower in the zone. But Gibson, not getting barreled enough either, that I don't have a ton of faith in this Oakland stack, Greg. And especially with the roof closed, like if the roof were open, I think you can make that justification a little bit more. But Oakland, they are under-owned according to the top stacks tool. So I get why people would go here, but I think I'd be more inclined to be on Gibson's side, and I guess hedging a little bit more with Oakland, but not really getting to a ton of ownership. But how are you feeling about the Oakland bats? 4.4 implied runs, not a bad total, especially considering that roof being closed.
Yeah, so the key to me here is just the ownership on the A's is so low. On paper, I don't think this is a particularly good stack. However, We do have them with a 9.9% chance of being the top stack of the day and only a 4.8% ownership share. So that's a massive gap. We have about twice as likely to be the top stack as what their ownership is. And that has them as the most positively leveraged offense on the slate. So I think it makes sense at the very least to be overweight to the Oakland A's. And if I'm going to nitpick with Kyle Gibson at all, I can't really do anything about his numbers this year as a negative because he's been really solid this year. But his numbers the last couple of years have been so poor. So 2020, 5.35 ERA, 5.7 expected ERA. 2019, 4.84 ERA, 5.03 expected ERA. So there is still a part of me that thinks like, hey, he's only made 13 starts this year. What do I weigh more heavily? Do I weigh the 13 starts he's made this year, or do I look at the previous, 50 starts from the 2 years before and kind of take that also and weigh it a little bit? So with that in mind, if Kyle Gibson is going to continue to pitch like the guy we've seen so far this year, then yeah, he's going to have a really strong outing. But if he regresses at all, I think this is the spot to at least take Oakland A's stacks because they're going so low owned. So I'm going to be playing both sides of this. I'm going to be overweight to Gibson. I'm also going to be overweight to Oakland.
And we talk about it a lot, again, if you're newer to the shows, that, for baseball, it's really one sport where you can really try to attack both probabilities here, or both potential outcomes for a situation that has some volatility. And I tend to believe that Kyle Gibson, if he does get hit pretty hard in this one, it's going to be more from the one-off bats, and I find it unlikely to see a full stack get there. But if you do believe that Kyle Gibson comes with a lot of risk, as Greg's pointing out here, like he has had a higher batting average, never really been a guy giving up a lot in the way of power, though certainly not as good as he's been this year, but a 3% home run rate since 2019 to be around league average. The 1.6% he's got this year, certainly well under that. But I feel like I'm with you conceptually that, if you are going to play Gibson at any volume, it's probably worth getting some Oakland bats, but I still think I would err more on the side of taking the smaller stacks or the one-offs rather than going to a full 5-man. But if you were going to Oakland bats, Greg, which ones jump out to you? Because I do think you have a lot of guys. I would try to target a little more of the launch angle guys to me, like Canha, Matt Olson, though the price tag for Matt Olson, I think pretty gross at just shy of $6K on DraftKings. And then you have some of the cheaper guys. I know we've historically talked about Jed Lowry being a little improved this year. I don't mind that one, though. Not the best price for him. Chapman appeals to me a little bit more. And Seth Brown, I think, is a value play. A guy I don't mind getting to is a lefty bat. And Gibson has struggled more historically against lefties. So that's what I'd point out. 4.7 extra for him against lefties since 2019. But Greg, get Oakland bats. Who jumps out to you the most?
Yeah, so there's a lot of prices actually that stand out to me on FanDuel. Like you just mentioned, Jed Lowry. While he's at 4,800 on DraftKings, he's $2,000 cheaper on FanDuel. So to me, Kyle Lowry is actually one of the better value infielders on FanDuel. So he makes more sense there. I do agree. Matt Olson, really expensive on FanDuel and DraftKings, a little hard to make stacks and get to him. I don't think Mitch Moreland is a bad pivot as long as he's in the lineup. Mitch Moreland has struggled a little bit as of late, except he offers so much price savings compared to Matt Olson, and he also has a third of the ownership. So that's another way I think that already, if you're going to take contrarian stack to make it even more contrarian, subbing in Mitch Moreland for Matt Olson, that's another way to do it. Matt Chapman, also somebody who I think makes sense on both sites. He's a little bit too cheap on FanDuel. On DraftKings, there's just no ownership going there. And after Matt Chapman struggled a little bit hitting to start the year, he's been much better over the last 2-3 weeks now. So Matt Olson, who is now riding, something like a 12-game hitting streak, he's somebody that I think makes sense to get, certainly more than the 2.6% ownership he has on DraftKings right now. In the build I did this morning, which is just my dummy build, not final, but just kind of an idea for when I do the show and I can talk about which guys, if the slate started now, would I be getting to more or less in the field? I have Matt Chapman at about 10% of my lineup. So certainly a lot more in the field has him.
Yep, I think that makes sense. And we got our guy, Josh in chat, asking about Elvis Andrus. I don't think that's a guy I would see a lot of upside in. Even the steals probably not going to be there for him. Kyle Gibson, a little bit above league average in terms of his weighted stolen base production, -1, and actually to both sides of the plate. But I guess, would you play any Andrus for yourself? Like, I wouldn't hate if you're playing a bunch, but I presume Josh is not playing a bunch since you mentioned he was new on FanDuel today. But Andrus, to me, would be the one Oakland bat I feel like doesn't have a ton of utility.
So the only thing I'll add is that he's 2,100 on FanDuel.
Gotcha.
So that is something that on FanDuel at least makes him a stronger play than on DraftKings, hitting at the bottom of the order at 3,200. There's a pretty big difference between somebody who's 2,100 or 3,200. So it would only be a thing if you're making a 4-man A's stack and you absolutely need to save money. I think it's fine to go to Andrus, but he's not by any means a priority play.
The other side, we got Frankie Montas going against Texas with 4.1 implied runs going for the Rangers. And Montas on the year, he's been one of those guys that I really don't find the most appealing on any given slate, but 28% expected ownership today, a reasonable projection for him too. That should make him pop up on an optimizer if using the Awesemo projections today. And worth pointing out, the ownership projections for the main slate are free on the site today. So if you are not a premium member, you can get those for yourself for free today. But if you do want to get them every single day, use that promo code MLB Strategy to get 25% off of your first week at awesemo.com/join. But check out the ownership projections for free on the site today. Montas, though, 24.2% K rate on the year, which is still down from the 25.3% he's had historically. Should be at least, I guess, a lateral park shift for him being in Texas with the roof closed compared to what he's normally getting in Oakland. 1.3 whip, I think, gives you some cause for concern as the 260 batting average, but Greg, I feel like I get the ownership from Montas. He's just one of those guys to me that I probably would take a little more in the way of Texas stacks who look under-owned according to the top stacks tool, but I don't really expect them to come through because Montas has been good enough and honestly probably should have more strikeouts based on the 12.3% swing strike rate and 35% chase rate he's had. And I guess in my mind, I've always had him filed away as like, oh, this guy's much worse since the PED situation, but he's honestly been basically the same dude. And I think that's something to just to keep in mind if you're like me and adjust the expectations. He had a bad run initially, but now it's pretty much leveled out to the point that I think he's a fine play, but one that I'd take a little bit less in the field and try to get some Texas bats against.
Yeah, and especially over the last 5 starts, he's scored at least 22 DraftKings points in 4 of them. So, I mean, I don't have an issue with him. It's funny because even though he's had, the issues with the PEDs and whatnot, he does not appear to be a guy who has struggled with the crackdown of pitching substances. He is somebody who was maybe injecting himself with performance enhancing drugs, but he's not putting anything on the ball that's impacting his spin rate. So, I mean, he's still pitched really well as of late, and that's something we're going to have to talk about with Yu Darvish later, is that he's somebody who has had a pretty substantial drop-off in spin rate and even admitted that he was somebody who always used substances to get a better grip on the ball. So, I mean, Frankie Montas, just relative to the other high-end pitching options, I personally don't see a massive difference between guys like Darvish, Urias, or Montas. I think they all come with different risks and concerns. So I tend to go about even with the field on all 3 of them. So I'm going to be getting to Montas right around with the field. He's pitched really well recently. It's a favorable matchup against the Texas Rangers. And then also, like you mentioned, he got off to a slow start to the season, but he's been so much better over the last month that, it just looks like he's a solid pitcher now. And his velocity has looked really good this year, 96.6 average fastball velocity. So, there's no real concerning downtick in terms of him coming off a shoulder injury, no issues with him coming off PED suspension, none of that stuff. He's still pitched well.
Now going against him for the Texas bats, I think Adolis Garcia does stand out at 1% expected ownership, given the pop that he's had going against right-hand pitching, a 268 ISO for him so far, and 160 at-bats against righties since 2019, or, relative, obviously he hasn't played that whole time, but that's the rolling sample size that I'm looking at for the splits. Joey Gallo probably should also benefit, given that Montas has struggled a little bit more against lefties, the 1.4 whip and a 260 batting average, though the xFIP shockingly lower against lefties, 3.4, so I would think that's probably a little bit of an aberration, given that he's given up a 180 ISO to those guys, but those bats stand out to me. And I guess Nate Lowe relative to his price tag, I think another lefty, top of the order, expect to be in the top of the order at the 2-hole. I feel like he's another fine play. Greg, if you had to pick Texas bats to go against Montas, which ones would you want to choose?
I really don't like Texas as a stack all that much, just as I think there are better pitchers to target against, especially considering how well Montas has pitched as of late. That and the Rangers have not had very good offense lately. So there are some guys like Joey Gallo always makes some sense as a one-off, but the issue is that he's fairly popular on both FanDuel and DraftKings. There's obviously home run upside there. He's some of the best power in all of baseball, but the ownership just looks about appropriate to maybe even a little bit too high for me. And then looking at other guys, like it's bad hitters. Ian Kiner Falefa, don't really want to roster him a whole bunch. I don't want to roster Nick Solak a whole bunch. And then guys at the end of the lineup, it's like Eli White and Brock Holt. So some of these lefties, if you need to get to them, Nate Lowe, Willie Calhoun, Joey Gallo. But other than Calhoun, it looks to me like Nate Lowe and Joey Gallo, the ownership's already there.
And Joey Gallo plus 300 at a home run today, according to Odd Shopper. Adolis Garcia plus 300 at home run today. So those are the guys that are jumping out relative to the prop betting that's out there. And of course, you can always check for those odds yourself at oddshopper.com or oddshopper.awesemo.com. Under the player props, you can see to hit a home run is going to give you those odds for the day. But definitely a good way to fact check, I guess, what you're looking at for a slate. But I think Joey Gallo, to me, as a one-off, probably the most appealing, though the field, as Greg mentioned, will be there about 10% on DraftKings. So keep that in mind. Next game up. And by the way, if you are missing this show, or also you just want to relive the awesome moments of me yelling at a guy with 2 troll accounts on YouTube, you can go to the Awesemo Podcast Network at awesemo.com/podcast. And the good news, you can get every sport you want on there. We have podcast feeds for them for shows like this one, the ones that have a little bit of a lifespan. You won't find a live before lock or a deeper dive on there because those are basically dead within the slate timing. But this show will be on there, and also the shows like the NBA strategy show, the PGA strategy shows, all of those. So go to awesemo.com/podcast. It's also going to be your easiest way to win a free Awesemo Plus membership, because if you give 5 stars and a review and leave your Twitter username or email address, they'll give you guys a chance to win a free week of Awesemo Plus. So go do that right now. Check out all the podcasts, leave some positive reviews, and you'll find your chance to win a free week of Awesemo Plus, because we're giving those away every Friday. And honestly, sometimes people don't submit enough reviews there for them to even give it away. So go take advantage of that if you can, if you don't want to pay for a membership. Let's talk about the next game. Cleveland, 3.1 implied runs going against Adbert Alzolay. Now, Alzolay on the year, not throwing a ton of pitches per appearance, only 83 per appearance for him on the year, but a 27% K rate, 3.6 xFIP, 1.04 whip. Looking like star numbers for him on the year, Greg, including a 12.1% swing strike rate that's improved, 34.2% chase rate also improved, and a decent launch angle, 10.8 degrees. I guess the barreled ball rate of 11%, not fantastic, but still a low total here. And Alzolay's price tag, I think, to me, would make him the most appealing pitcher on the slate relative to this price point. So how are you feeling about Alzolay? He'll be a little bit less owned than Montas. That also is part of my consideration here, in addition to being cheaper on DraftKings. But are you willing to go to Alzolay given the fact that he has a little more volatility than Montas, who, as you mentioned, has been really consistent as of late?
So I feel like we need a little bit more information on Alzolay, just because he's been dealing with a blister and has been on the injured list. So he hasn't started in a little while. The last time he made a start was June 7th. So 2 weeks ago, and he only ended up working 3 innings in that start. So I have pretty big concerns about how long he's going to be allowed to work into the game. So as of now, I actually don't have him in my player pool just for that reason. I think there's a chance he just only pitches 3 or 4 innings. It's always a concern for me when a pitcher hasn't pitched in a couple of weeks and is coming off an injured list and is making a start. So I would definitely like to get an update from beat reporters just in terms of what kind of restrictions, if any, Alzolay has.
Okay, so I guess with that caveat in mind, how are you feeling about him if we're to assume that he is operating close to full snuff?
Yeah, I mean, if he was full go, then obviously he'd have to end up in my player pool, but I would still prefer Darvish, Urias, and Montas to him. They're all guys that I think are better pitchers. And then Alzolay, even when he has been full go, it's not like he's been working, like you said, super deep into games. He hasn't been that efficient. He's only thrown over 100 pitches once the entire season. Actually, I think he's only thrown even over 90 pitches 2 or 3 times the entire season. So Alzolay's always a guy where I get a little bit concerned in terms of how long he's going to be allowed to work into game. And the difference between somebody like Alzolay or say like Jake Odorizzi, who he concerns about, is that Alzolay is way more expensive. So Alzolay is still one of the most highly priced pitchers on the slate. So you would need him to outscore Darvish, Urias, Montas, Tyler Mahle, in all likelihood, to be able to be on a GPP winning lineup at this kind of price. And I don't find that all that likely if he's full go, just because even when he has been full go, they've been kind of cautious with him.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable way to look at it. And I think, the field's ownership right now, 21%. I think I could get to a little bit more and feel comfortable. I guess assuming that there aren't any reports coming out about the pitch count being substantially lower, but still a spot for Alzolay. He's been working decently efficient, 3.9 pitches per plate appearance compared to 3.9 for Montas as well. So I think these guys probably more similar plays, I guess, other than the risk you're taking on with Alzolay and whatever's going on with that blister. The Indians bats, I think, are also still in play as one-offs here. Alzolay has struggled with home run power on the year, 4.3% rate, though still, getting more positive results than giving up the home runs. But you do have some bats here that I think you could justify, though. 5,800 for Jose Ramirez, kind of an ugly price tag, even though he's going to be about 8% owned. But an Eddie Rosario, I feel like, stands out as being okay. If Bobby Bradley were to be in the lineup, I wouldn't hate that either, though he's not currently the projected one. But Greg, any Cleveland hitters for you, given that they do have an under-owned stack, it looks like, according to the top stacks tool?
Yeah, this is a team I definitely want to be overweight to the field. I only project for 2.8% ownership right now. And also a pitcher like Alzolay, while he's been good when he's at full health, we haven't seen him start in 2 weeks, and he was dealing with a blister issue. So that brings in a whole lot of questions here. How is he going to look after the long layoff? Is he going to be restricted? Is he just going to come out and struggle with his command or something like that? So to me, I think this is a spot where there's so little ownership going to the Indians, and I have so many questions surrounding Alzolay now that it makes it a pretty good ownership spot to get to the Indians when nobody's going there. So, Bradley Zimmer, he's almost min price. He's somebody to roster. Bobby Bradley, he's hit really well as of late, and I think that he is somebody also who, like you said, we don't have the ownership projections right now, so it's a little hard to gauge how popular he might be, but based on the rest of the ownership on this team being so low, we don't have anybody projected. Let's see. So the most rostered player in the lineup right now, other than Jose Ramirez, who's also really expensive, it is Eddie Rosario, projected for 3.3% ownership. So just given that information, it's hard for me to think that Bobby Bradley would be projected much differently than like 2 to 3% owned. So to me, everybody here is worth being well overweight to the field on, with the exception being Jose Ramirez at 7.7%. But Ahmed Rosario, 2%. Bradley Zimmer, 2%. I assume Bobby Bradley ends up being somewhere around 2%. Cesar Hernandez, 2%. Eddie Rosario, 3%. These are all guys that I want to be like 7 to 10% on.
You're definitely one to watch to see. The projected lineup, again, doesn't have Bradley in it right now, or at least the one that I think we're using. So if that does change around, and something to keep in mind for baseball too, where sometimes these teams won't look great in the morning, or they will look great, and then you'll find out, oh, this guy's out, this core bat's out, or this core bat's in. It can move around a little bit when you get the confirmed lineup. So if you're new to MLB DFS, make sure to track that throughout the day and pay attention to the projections as well that we have on Awesemo.com. Aaron Civale going on the other side, reasonable price tag, and he's had some upside days largely because he's thrown 99 pitches per appearance on the year. Also works pretty efficiently, 3.8 pitches per batter face. So those marks are pretty solid for him. He doesn't get strikeouts, though. That's the main issue. 19% K rate for him. The 1.1 whip is decent, and that's why you'll sometimes see him have good days. And he's going against the Cubs teams that strikes out at a 26% clip on the year. And the park factors, I feel like, actually, let me double check. Is the wind blowing out in this one, or is the wind, wind's blowing in? I think Civale is in play. I guess the field also thinks so. He'll be 17.5%, it looks like, on the DraftKings ownership for today. But I don't think Civale is a bad play. I just feel like the strikeout stuff isn't there enough to reliably get there. But if you don't like, one of Alzolay, you don't like Montas that much, to me, Civale is the one you can get to. And I find it hard to believe he's going to kill you. I know he's had some games where he has given up a lot of production, but the numbers on the year are just solid enough, Greg, that I think Civale is in play. I just don't have a ton of faith in him.
He's just too expensive to me. For a guy that doesn't generate strikeouts, that's priced all the way up to 8,500 on DraftKings. And then on FanDuel, Civale is at 8,000 for a single pitcher site. It's just a bad price to me on both sides. To me, I wish he was priced in the range of guys like Kyle Gibson and Jake Odorizzi. Then I think we'd have more of a conversation point. But Civale's so expensive that, we just talked about we just talked about Alzolay. Alzolay is only $400 more expensive than Civale on DraftKings. And I do think that even with the concerns with Alzolay, there's more upside with him. And I already don't really like Alzolay for this slate. So Civale, 19.3% K rate for the year. His results have been okay. He's a 3.48 ERA, but his underlying stats, 4.4 expected ERA, 4.37 FIP. Last year, at a 4.74 ERA, 4.42 expected ERA. I don't think Civale's particularly good, and he doesn't even have a favorable fantasy outlook because of the lack of strikeouts, lack of swing and misses. So to me, Civale, he's too expensive to really consider a strong play.
Okay, that's a reasonable way to look at it. I view him as a guy, like, to me, the pitch count's always the thing, or, for the average pitches on the year. And if he's just shy of 100, I do think there's a pathway here against the Cubs team that's only getting on base at a 300 clip on the year, that maybe he can sort of be efficient enough and hang in the game long enough to get there. But certainly there's a risk profile that you're taking on with that as well. 3.8% run rate on the year is not terrible, but definitely has given up some power historically, as well as a decent hard hit rate. The Cubs hitters, though, I think I'm a little more of a believer in Civale, though I do think the Cubs have some home run capability to get here. Rizzo stands out to me. Jock Peterson, the leadoff hole. Don't love the price tag, but I think also an interesting play at under 5% ownership. Those guys actually both going to be under 5% owned, despite the lefty-righty matchup for both of them. So that kind of surprises me. But Gregory, how are you feeling about the Cubs? Because I guess the mini stack of Bryant, Baez, and Contreras will be owned, but it seems odd the full stack wouldn't get there. And I guess I'd be more inclined to take a full stack here, but not at the highest volume. Only a 4.3% chance of being a top stack today.
Yeah, and we do have them still picking up more ownership than their chance of being a top stack. And then combined with there's a really low run total in this game, the over-under is only 7. And then also the wind blowing, and that's going to be another concern. If we're going to have, 12 miles per hour wind blowing in from center field, I think there's going to be a lot of balls put in play against Civale. But it seems most likely there's a good chance there's going to be a lot of weak flyouts. So considering the ownership on some of these guys, 10% to Baez, 8% to Chris Bryant, 13.5% to Wilson Contreras, I think the guys that are actually good hitters in the Cubs lineup, there's already too much ownership going to them considering the weather conditions here. And then the guys at the end of the order, they just aren't particularly good hitters. So, I don't have a whole lot of interest in going to, like Ian Happ or going to Sergio Alcantara or anything like that. So the guys that I actually think are worthwhile in the Cubs lineup are basically owned, although Anthony Rizzo, the one exception, only at 2.4% projected ownership. He's the one guy that I'm currently overweight to.
I feel like Jock Peterson plus 300 odds to hit home run today on Odd Shopper, and a guy who also has a high exit velocity, 93 miles per hour, a little bit shy of that. I think he's one guy where I wouldn't necessarily worry about the win and think that he actually has a decent shot here if he's in the leadoff spot of hitting a home run today with the 291 ISO since 2019 against right-hand pitching. But yeah, overall, probably a downgrade, and I think I'd be more inclined to take the under-owned bats as we just talked about here, Rizzo and Peterson in particular. And if people are going to be going to Bryant, Baez, and Contreras, that is one way to get leverage on the field is if Peterson or Rizzo has some success. Next game up, and guys, hit that like button if you can. We appreciate it a bunch here, and make sure to check out all the other shows on the channel as well, because we'll be doing a lot of baseball content today, including the deeper dive and live before lock that I'll be back for with Eric Lindquist later today. So tune into that one right before the slate locks. We got Cincinnati getting 4.8 implied runs against Jay Happ, and he's been, I think, well, based on the numbers on the year, he has to be considered the worst pitcher on the slate, I'd say, though. I guess that Aiken in the first game could be pretty close, but Happ 5.6 xFIP, a 282 batting average allowed this year, 17% strikeout rate, 1.44 whip, not walking guys a lot, which I guess is probably a positive for the hitters here because you are going to get these guys having more shots to actually get the ball out of the park. It's not great park factors though. 66-degree weather, only 30% humidity in Minnesota today, and the wind 10 miles per hour, but it's blowing in which direction? Blowing out to right. So I guess that is a little bit of an upgrade there. I like the bats though, Greg, and I'll say I wouldn't play much Happ either. He's going to be 9% owned. I don't get why, other than buying into positive regression, but Happ's given up an 11.4% barrel ball rate this year, an 18-degree launch angle. He's basically giving perfect hitting situations for these guys, and I would love to see the weather be a little hotter in Minnesota, but I think this red stack is really appealing, Greg, and the chalk ownership to me is going to guys that I get it, but you can easily move around the chalk ownership and get to some lower owned guys.
Yeah, Happ's been terrible this year. So the Reds are definitely a team that I'm going to be stacking up a lot today. Happ, 6.12 ERA, 5.23 expected ERA. Also putting so many balls in the air against them. And then when you also consider we have that wind blowing out to right center field, this seems like a recipe for a lot of home runs to be hit today. Only a 33.2% ground ball rate this season for Jay Happ. And then he also has an 11.2% home run to fly ball rate. He's been a guy over the last 5-6 years that's had a well above league average home run to fly ball rate. So when you consider that he's a guy who no longer generates ground balls, home run to fly ball rate's always been high, not shading swing and misses either this year. This seems like a recipe for the Reds to potentially have a really big upside game. So this is a team that I definitely want to make a pretty high priority.
Which bats jump out the most to you? Because we're going to see a lot of ownership going to Tyler Stevenson, who I think is a very solid play. Eugenio Suarez has a longer-term sample size of really having a lot of success against left-hand pitching, 254 ISO since 2019. Aristides Aquino is always a guy that I'm willing to get to, a high launch angle guy or decent launch angle guy who does have some pop. I'm actually surprised he's got a low exit velocity on the year, but 84 miles per hour exit velocity is not the best, but he should be driving that ball a little bit more than that over the course of time with a 7.4% home run rate. But there was enough guys here, Greg, that I honestly, you list most of these guys. I guess the one that I have less confidence in is Jesse Winker, who's just never been that great against lefties, and it also is 5,600. That's another part of it too. But which bats would you want to prioritize here with guys like Jonathan India being 5K? Like I get it. He's getting on base pretty well, but he's one I'd have a really tough time paying that price tag with 10% of the ownership also being there.
Yeah, I don't mind getting Jesse Winker on this slate just because the ownership is so low, and he's hit lefties, even though not as well as he's hit righties this year. Jesse Winker still against lefties this year does have a 103 WRC plus against left-handed pitching. Against right-handed pitching, he's a 196 WRC plus. But here's the other key that I think to this spot. If the red stack is actually going to work out, I don't think Jay Happ's going to be in the game for very long. And they're going to be going to a bullpen. There's a good chance that Jesse Winker at very low ownership is going to be facing a right-hand pitcher then at some point in this game, and potentially even earlier rather than later, because there's a chance that Jay Happ only makes it through the order, once or twice. And Jesse Winker for the year, he's hit 17 homers. He's a 179 WRC plus overall. So Jesse Winker, I think, is actually a good way to diversify red stacks just because he's so low owned at only 3% right now on DraftKings. Same goes for somebody like Joey Votto. I think a lot of people are just looking at the left on left matchup and saying, I don't want any part of these guys. But Jay Happ doesn't get out lefties or righties anyway. And I don't think he's going to be in the game for very long. So it's not something that really concerns me that much. And everybody's making stacks. And while, yeah, I think Aquino, I think that Castellanos, Suarez, and all these guys are strong plays. But relative to ownership, I actually really do want to get to the lefties here.
And on the other side, we're going to have Tyler Mahle going against Minnesota. I mentioned his strikeout prop earlier on PrizePicks being a little bit interesting. And he's the best strikeout guy I would grade on the slate, I guess, especially with some of the uncertainty around Yu Darvish in particular, I guess. But even relative to Yu Darvish on the year, 29.6% K rate for Mahle, a little bit higher. He's also got a 3.6 xFIP, and he's a guy that I do like. The issue, or I guess not the issue, the concern I would have is A, the price tag, B, the fact that Mahle does tend to let guys hang into at-bats a little bit longer, 4.3 pitches per plate appearance for him, or going against him on the year. And this is a team that does get on base decently well, 316 on base percentage against right-hand pitching, and also mediocre strikeout rate, or 20, league average-ish strikeout rate of 23%. Mahle, I think, is a good matchup, Greg, especially if he's going to be 14% owned or a good play today. But I do think that I'm willing to just, die on this hill with him because it's a tough matchup. We know Minnesota has a ton of power. So how are you feeling about Mahle? Because I think to me, he's a 25% play for myself if he's going to be 13 or 14% owned on DraftKings. But it does seem like there's some risk here. And honestly, the projection for Mahle is not that great from Awesemo today.
Yeah, so something else to consider here also is that Nelson Cruz got hurt during yesterday's game, and he might not be in the lineup, so that would be a pretty big hit to the Minnesota offense. But yeah, I think Mahle has as much upside as any of the top-end guys on the slate, and his ownership isn't there. 8.6% projected ownership on FanDuel. DraftKings, we have him projected for 13.6% projected ownership, but with a 23% chance of being one of the top two scoring pitchers on the slate. So then you look at Mahle's numbers this year, and they're really solid. 3.39 ERA, 3.06 expected ERA. Like you said, the strikeout numbers have been there, striking out 29.6% of the hitters that he's faced. And this goes back to last year. This isn't just a one-off year for Tyler Mahle. He was basically exactly as good last year. Last year, he had a 29.9% strikeout rate. He had a 3.59 ERA and a 3.37 expected ERA. So to me, Mahle, relative to what his ownership is, I actually do think that he's the pitcher that I want to be most overweight to.
Yeah, so we are on the same page. I think, watch the ownership projection for this one, because to me, if he gets closer to 20%, then maybe you're just with the field. Right now at around 13 or 14%, I want to be above it. But I think there's certainly some volatility that could come with the ownership projections moving around. And I do think taking some Twins bats going the other way makes sense. You mentioned the Nelson Cruz thing, so maybe he's out today. But Byron Buxton being back in the lineup, he's been a monster overall, both in the last season and change. Since last season, he's got a 360 ISO, a 162 WRC plus. Buxton has been like an MVP caliber guy without, I guess, the recognition overall across the industry that he probably deserves, though the injuries that don't help that either. But Buxton, to me, I get the Fields ownership being there 16% on DraftKings, and I don't mind taking guys like Miguel Sano, Max Kepler. We talk about a lot, always going to be home run, boomer bust type guys, but Kepler at 3K, I think is pretty interesting. Sano, a little bit expensive, a little bit more expensive rather, at 4,400, but still a 307 ISO against right-hand pitching since 2019. I think you can stack the Twins a lot of ways, Greg, to, defer whatever risk you're taking on with Mahle. And I think it's an appealing move given the situation. The chance here, we could just have a game where both sides do tee off.
Yeah, I'm not going to get to the Twins all that much. I think that Mahle is really good. He's pitched, with the exception being he had one start where he got absolutely blasted against the Giants. But beyond that, he's been really solid this season. And, the hitters in the Twins lineup are still pretty expensive. And then even guys like Byron Buxton, you mentioned, 16% owned today. I don't want to get to 16% Byron Buxton going up against Tyler Mahle. I don't have anywhere close to the build I made this morning. So guys like Buxton, Donaldson, Kepler, these guys all have double-digit ownership, and I don't think it's warranted in such a tough spot. So I'm going to have, if I have any Twins, it's going to be a pretty light amount of them. I like many, many offenses better than them today.
Okay, I'll just make the case here to close it out then that I think the Cincinnati bullpen behind Mahle is pretty bad, and if these guys do get on base or just draw out bats a little bit more, given Mahle's inefficiency at finishing off the batters going against him, again 4.3 pitches per appearance is not the greatest mark, and the bullpen behind him also a 1.4 WHIP, 3.9% on run rate, and a 4.6 xFIP for the Cincinnati bullpen. I think there's a pathway here, and to me, this is a spot where if I'm going to be above the field on Mahle, I do want to get some Twins bats in the mix, whether it be, I think probably more in the way of mini stacks, but still, I think there's some room here for there to be production on both sides, or potentially for Mahle to bust here and not have the greatest day, and then Minnesota to sort of capitalize on a bad bullpen who's going to be pitching more if Mahle doesn't act efficiently in the beginning of the start. Next game up, we got Milwaukee, 4.9 implied runs going against Merrill Kelly. This is a spot where right now the roof is projected to be open in Arizona, even though it's supposed to be 107 degrees, not high humidity, but still that kind of weather can certainly change the outcome a little bit, Greg. And Merrill Kelly projected for 14% ownership, which I guess it's because of the matchup against Milwaukee. They strike out at a 26% clip on the year against right-hand pitching, but I don't trust Merrill Kelly to get those strikeouts, and I also don't trust the Milwaukee bats to be as good as the ownership they're going to have, though they are looking a little bit under on the top stacks tool. If I had to choose, I would go to the Milwaukee bats, Greg, but I don't love either side here. How are you feeling about Merrill Kelly or the Brewers bats?
Yeah, I don't like Merrill Kelly. The other thing about the Brewers, though, is now also that Christian Yelich is back. They have a lot of left-handed batters they could throw at Merrill Kelly, especially considering if the roof is going to be open. We've seen this as play as such a strong hitter's park. So I think there's chance just to be a really favorable hitting environment. Some of these lefties going up against Merrill Kelly, Christian Yelich, Colton Wong, Omar Narvaez, Dan Vogelbach, Jackie Bradley Jr. I think all of them make for pretty good plays. That and outside of Yelich and Wong, the price tag on Wong is a little weird at 4,700, but I don't mind paying up for Yelich and then getting to guys like Dan Vogelbach and his power upside at 4,000. I like him on DraftKings. Jackie Bradley Jr. is a value play towards the end of the lineup. I think that he makes sense on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So as long as the roof is open, it's weird because we wouldn't think that's something that matters all that much. But for this particular game, I actually really do think it does. And if the roof does end up being open, I think this is a really, really favorable hitting environment.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's worth noting, though, that Kelly is a weird reverse splits guy where he's been very bad against left-hand hitters in terms of giving up more walks and hits, a 1.4 whip. But he's given up a lot more power to righties over the course of time, where since 2019, he's faced 663 righties and given up a 4.7 xFIP compared to 4.1 to lefties, 4.8% on run rate compared to 2.4% for lefties, and then also a 213 ISO compared to 154 to lefties. And I don't know that's something that holds up. I mean, it's held up over the course of time, so I guess I shouldn't say that. But I think the righties here may be also just as valuable. And obviously El Garcia, all it takes is people stacking up those lefties a lot, but then those guys getting on base and Garcia can knock one out. I'm not the best power bat either, but the same logic would apply for, I guess, Adames too, or somebody a little bit further down the order. I guess Urias really wouldn't have much in the way of power, but I think there's some ways to go to the righty bats here too. And it looks like the righty bats are being unowned for whatever reason, and all the lefties are being loaded up on for the Brewers. Brett Anderson on the other side is going to be a guy that I still won't play. I know he had the one big game last time out, which now finally getting the rank on the top pitchers tool. So that's the big move for Brett Anderson, where he's had some days where he had a 0% chance to be a top pitcher, 0% chance to be a top value. Today, 6% chance to be a top pitcher and 1% ownership. So Greg, would you go to any Brett Anderson here and hope you can ride the wave of him having at least one good game recently?
No, I mean, so Brett Anderson, we've made fun of him a whole lot. The other thing also that was weird is, remember, we had those games where not only was it like, oh, Brett Anderson has scored like 5 or less DraftKings points in 5 consecutive starts, but he was also like 8,600 or something like that on DraftKings. So at least the DK pricing algorithm has finally given up on him, because he's now priced all the way down to 6,500, which is more appropriate given his skill set at this point in his career. But the ERA doesn't look all that bad at 4.24, but Brett Anderson is a 7.2 expected ERA this year. I saw in the YouTube chat that we had, who was that said it? Mike Campbell said, so when do the D-backs get their frustrations out? 2-27 in their last 29 games. Not great. And I'm pretty sure they have close to the longest road losing streak in the history of baseball. They lost some absurd amount of road games in a row. But I look at Brett Anderson's numbers, and especially that expected ERA is so high. I think it's a pretty good move to stack against him, particularly once again, if the roof is going to be open. It does look like there's going to be some ownership going to Arizona. But to me, not something I care all that much about if the roof is going to be open, just because Anderson has been so poor this year.
Yeah, the one thing that jumps out with Anderson, he does have just a 4-degree launch angle allowed, or 4.3-degree launch angle allowed on the year. So he is keeping that ball pretty flat, even though he's getting barreled to the 13% clip. So these guys are hitting very hard ground balls against him. And the weather, I think, if the roof is closed, I would feel a little bit more concerned for the Arizona lineup and their ownership going there. If the roof does stay open at almost 110 degrees, I think I'm willing to take my shots with the Arizona bats a little bit more. But something to keep in mind, though, that he is keeping that ball down fairly well. And still, about a league average home run rate, 3.4%. Historically, he's been a 3% guy. So that's something also where I don't know that I'm expecting them to tee off, but I do think there's room for production, obviously, going against Brett Anderson. Which bat jump out to you? Because I feel like Ketel Marte under 5K. So to me, the best bat on the team by a pretty wide margin here against left-hand pitching. Does have a 291 ISO, 375 batting average against lefty pitching. But Eduardo Escobar, I feel like also looks solid. I also don't mind Asdrubal Cabrera, Nick Ahmed down the order. Nick Ahmed's one of those guys who's hit lefties really well. And for some reason, people never pick up on that, never play him, but he always gets his home runs against lefties. And I feel like very rarely gets them against righties. But those guys are the ones that stand out to me, Greg, especially Ahmed, I think under 6% ownership compared to a lot of these guys who are going to be in the 15% range. But which Arizona bats would you want to go to the most?
Yeah, so in the build I have this morning is Asdrubal Cabrera, Ketel Marte, Eduardo Escobar, Christian Walker, Nick Ahmed. I have double-digit ownership to all of those guys, and I'm also slightly overweight to all of them. So to me, I mean, that's the 5-man Arizona stack I'd want to get to. Ahmed, Walker, Escobar, Marte, Cabrera.
All right, last game on the slate, we got the Dodgers 3.3 implied runs against Yu Darvish, and Yu Darvish, one of those guys who Greg talked about earlier, could be on the watch list here. And it's I'm sure you guys might have seen the ESPN headlines that opposing managers are now going to break with the long-held tradition of not snitching on each other, and now they're going to actively be asking for guys to be looked at if there is any sort of substance or concern over substance type things. Greg mentioned the spin rate coming down, and the results have also been down for Darvish. 29.3% K rate for him on the year, which is down from 30.8% to 2019. 12.1% swing strike rate, down from 13.3%. Also getting guys to chase less, 30% chase rate compared to 33%. Darvish here, Greg, going to be owned like he's the guy that he's been all year, or I guess the last year and change, and high strikeout guy, stud pitcher. He's a scary play, I would say. 33% ownership going against the Dodgers. Clearly not as good of a Dodgers lineup as we've seen at portions of the year and certainly last year. But still, I think Darvish, I could get with the field. I think to me might be more of a 25% play than a 33% play. But how are you feeling about Darvish? I know you've loved him historically, but you're taking on probably the most risk you're ever taking on with him today, given the situation and baseball's crackdown here. It's going to officially start today.
Yeah, if I'm being honest, I don't really know what to do with with him because the pitching options are so poor. And on a talent basis, he's by far the best pitcher on the slate. But, I do have concerns with, I'm just going to Baseball Savant to pull up his spin rate right now for the month. But, because we've seen, even though baseball has not officially started cracking down on pitchers using substances, there's been a dip in a lot of pitcher spin rates where it's become pretty clear that pitchers have stopped using it anyway. And there's certain guys like on the opposite side of this game, Julio Urias, his spin rate has remained exactly the same during the month in June that it's been the rest of the season. Whereas Yu Darvish is somebody who it's come down a little bit. And the other thing too is I don't know what that makes him going forward. I still suspect he's going to be very good, but he's going to drop off in some way. And the field is already there, pretty popular. So my thing here is I don't have a real good read on it. It's a tough matchup against the Dodgers. I'm just going to, whatever the field ends up doing, I'll do the same with Darvish, unless something gets crazy where he's like 50% owned or 10% owned, then I'd want to go, over underweight to field. But as long as he stays in this, like 25 to 35% range, I'm just going to look at what the field does and say like, cool, that's what I'm doing with Darvish also.
It's worth pointing out 80% humidity today in San Diego, which is a lot for San Diego. The weather, not that hot, though, still under 70 degrees, but the ball could fly a little bit more. And Darvish has had a high fly ball rate in the year, 48%. So I think even if you are playing Darvish, you got to kind of prepare to see a home run or two go against him. And a 19-degree launch angle, too, I think is something that is basically asking guys to hit home run off of him. So in this spot, to me, I think Darvish, you got your absorb some risk, but he's still probably worth playing just because it's not a great pitching slate. As Greg talked about, he still is probably the most live arm here, unless you are a big believer in Tyler Mahle. The Dodgers bat still unowned, and I think that's still worth getting exposure given the risk profile and the high ownership. Will Smith, the only guy picking up ownership, but still 5% projected ownership for him, and he's raked against right-hand pitching for enough of a period of time with a 330 ISO, 168 WRC plus against right-hand pitching since 2019. But Dodgers bats for you, Greg, are you going to get there too to hedge against Darvish, or are you still feeling like that's not the most appealing play to you?
It's not the most appealing play, but the ownership's so low that, I think just based on some of the potential variants with Yu Darvish, I think it's okay to get to a little bit of the Dodgers, but by no means a primary play at all for me. So I have Yu Darvish's spin rates now. So his average spin rate through the month of May was 2,745. That's overall, rotations per pitch. Whereas in July, it's 2,629. So, if you look at a guy who has, about 100, let's see, so that's, somewhere around like a 10% reduction in his spin rate for the month this year versus this month versus last month, that's still fairly significant. And it implies that there's something that's changed with the way he has to pitch now. And, that adds enough variance to that I'd be willing to get to a little bit of Dodgers. But once again, if you're only playing 1, 5, 20 lineups, anything like that, then I don't think you have to play the Dodgers. Just for me, as somebody's going to be playing 150 lineups, I might have like 3 or 4% of Dodger stacks.
On the other side, we have Julio Urias going here, and he's going to be projected very similarly to Yu Darvish, according to Awesemo today, going against San Diego. And, Tatis should be back in today, right? Like, I know he was out yesterday, but that was just a maintenance day, right?
No, he's a shoulder injury.
Okay.
It's not really exactly, I think that there's a good chance he plays today, but yeah, he was diving for a ball in the, I think it was a play up the middle and banged his shoulder and was held out. The manager did say that he expects that that Tatis will be able to play today, except nothing set in stone. So it is possible that he doesn't end up playing. And by the way, if he's out, that would change how I view Julio Urias because that would make it a much more favorable matchup. But as of right now, I'm not really sure if Tatis ends up playing or not.
Gotcha. So Urias going to be owned pretty well either way, and it looks like the assumption for the Awesemo projections does have Tatis in. He's projected for 14% ownership right now, and Urias still projected for 24% ownership going the other way. He's at a 27% K rate on the year. Swinging strike and chase rate numbers actually are better than Darvish's, which is interesting to note given the discrepancy in what they're actually getting in terms of strikeouts. So sometimes that's just the way it is. Guys like Urias might not have the easiest time actually finishing a batter off, but Urias only 3.7 pitches per batter faced, actually a pretty good mark. So he's been working pretty efficiently. The pitch count, as it is usually with the Dodgers, not the highest at 87 per appearance for him, but I think Urias is worth the ownership he's going to get. I haven't loved him in a lot of spots this year, but I feel like the numbers have normalized here enough, Greg, where especially if Tatis is out, like I'm willing to get to Urias as it is because it's a short enough slate, but I think he gets a lot more appealing either way, if Tatis is not in, but I'm still willing to get there. Like 25% feels about right to me with Urias with what just the numbers are looking like on the year.
Yeah, it's just a little concerned. Like, what is his realistic upside here? He scored under 20 DraftKings points in 4 consecutive starts. He's only scored over 20 DraftKings points 5 times the entire season. And a lot of that's just been because, they're generally cautious with him. They don't let him throw a ton of pitches. He doesn't work all that deep into games. So Julio Urias, just given how thin the pitching options are today, I think he has to be in the player pool. But I would personally rather get to Darvish, Frankie Montas, or Tyler Mahle before getting to Julio Urias.
Yeah, it's not a great strikeout matchup either way, though. San Diego, not a ton of power on the year against left-hand pitching, only a 135 ISO, but 22.7% K rate. That actually would not be the best, though. Darvish being in the lineup does boost that strikeout rate up a little bit more to a 26.6. Actually, that's a lot more, but still, that should be some easy strikeouts, but the rest of the lineup not striking out a ton overall in the year. So one to watch out here. Maybe the confirmed lineup gets a little bit easier. Padres bats, though, Greg, are you willing to go there? Because I think, even though I might believe a little more in Urias, I think more the thing with Urias is that I find it hard to believe he gets killed by the Padres today. They have better hitters against left-hand pitching overall. But still, guys like Cronenworth get a lot worse. Hosmer gets a lot worse. I don't think the Padres are a stack that I'm dying to get to, but how are you feeling about them?
Yeah, there's also ownership going here. Like right now, I have Tatis expected to be in the lineup and projected for 14% ownership. That's pretty significant for a tough matchup. And the other thing too is even past Urias, the Dodgers have always had good bullpens. So, even if Urias only works 4, 5, 6 innings, there's probably going to be good pitchers that come in behind him, especially considering this is, a rivalry matchup, really high leverage. I expect both teams to go to all their best relievers for the majority of the series. So with that in mind, the Dodgers and the Padres, both sides, neither one of them are teams that really want to rush the offenses.
All right, there you go. So that's everything on today's slate. So make sure to go follow at Awesemo_com, follow at Chris Spags, and follow at Ehrenberg DFS to see all of the fine Greg tweets that I sometimes catch up with. I don't keep enough with Greg's world, and sometimes I like to scroll through the feed and see the various people that Greg is either inflaming or bringing joy to in a given day. But Greg, what are your plugs here? Because I'll be on MLB Live Before Lock later today with Eric, and I presume you've got one more coming up today.
Yeah, I'll be doing the MLB Deeper Dive with Alex right before you guys go. So I'll be with the boss man going up before you guys.
So there you go. So check that out here. Coming up a little bit later on the channel. Let me just make sure what times. I know my show's at 6, so I presume yours will be at 5 p.m. Eastern, and that looks like that's about correct. And actually, we also have a fun video coming up today, which looks like it's part of the same stream. We're going to have a daily fantasy tutorial with Josh and Alex right before Greg and Alex do the deeper dive. So tune into that one. That's at 4:30 Eastern, so 1:30 Pacific time. But go check that one out. That's actually, if you are a beginner player out there, it's going to help you out a lot and just provide some value right away to figure out how you should be crunching your lineups and sorting through them and all that. So go check them out. Also, make sure to use that promo code Awesemo over at PrizePicks for your $100 deposit match. And also check out the ownership projections today on the site because they're going to be free all day. So that's a good way to add out to your process in addition to watching that show with Josh and Alex coming up at 4:30 Eastern. We appreciate you guys for being here. Enjoy the rest of your days. Good luck.